Suffering forces a question every human being eventually asks. People have asked the same question for centuries. If God is good, why does suffering exist? Why do good people get cancer? Why do children die? Why do tragedies happen to people who seem to have done everything right? And many Christian answers begin in the same place. God is sovereign. Everything happens for a reason. God is in control. But what if the most important thing Christianity says about suffering is something else entirely? The Christian claim is not that God explains suffering from a distance. The Christian claim is that God enters it. This disrupts a very common way we imagine God. Many people picture God as a distant manager of the universe, deciding who prospers, who suffers, who receives blessing, and who does not. In that picture, suffering becomes something God sends, or permits, or carefully designs. But the cross tells a different story. If we are honest, suffering rarely produces calm theological reflection. It exposes our deepest beliefs in the most visceral way. People look at the world and ask, if God is good, why does this happen? And when the pain is deep enough, the question becomes sharper. If this is the world God runs, why would I trust Him at all? Others move in a different direction. They stop asking the question altogether. Suffering convinces them that existence itself is chaotic, that there is no meaning behind anything, just random events in an indifferent universe. So people often arrive at one of two conclusions. Either God exists and cannot be trusted, or He exists, but we must do everything in our power to get on His right side. Dismissal of God, or a life cycle of appeasement. Those are often the only two options people believe they have. But the cross introduces a third possibility. If the Christian story is true, then suffering does not reveal a cruel God, and it does not prove a meaningless universe. It reveals something else entirely. It reveals a God who enters the suffering of the world instead of standing above it. If this is true, then one of two things must follow. Either suffering proves that God is distant and uncaring, or suffering becomes the very place where God chooses to meet humanity. Christianity insists on the second. At the center of the Christian story stands the man Jesus who healed the sick, forgave enemies, welcomed outsiders, and refused violence. And what happened to him? He was tortured and executed. Not because he failed, but because goodness threatened the systems of power around him. The cross reveals something unsettling about the world. Sometimes the world crucifies what is most true and most good. But the cross also reveals something astonishing about God. God does not respond by destroying His enemies. Instead, He absorbs their violence and answers with forgiveness. Father, forgive them. That is the cruciform vision of God. A God whose power is not domination. A God whose power is self-giving love. Imagine what it means if this is true. When a hospital room fills with fear, God is not absent. When injustice crushes someone's life, God is not indifferent. Every place of suffering becomes a place where divine compassion is already present. But one thing must be lost if this truth is embraced. We must let go of the idea that God guarantees a life free from tragedy. Christian faith has never promised safety. It promises something far more radical: presence. And this is not something we achieve. It is something already given. The cross is not humanity reaching God. It is God reaching humanity, even in its darkest moments. So the real question is not, why does suffering exist? The deeper question becomes, when suffering appears in the world, will we respond as an orphan or a son? Today that may look very ordinary. Sitting with someone who is hurting instead of explaining their pain. Forgiving someone who wounded you. Choosing compassion in a world that rewards cruelty. These small acts mirror the shape of the cross. And if this truth were lived, people around you would feel the difference. Your family would notice. Your friends would notice. Even your enemies would notice. Because the cross does not simply explain God. It reveals the kind of humanity we were meant to become in the person of Jesus. The Christian answer to suffering is not a theory, not more arms, more sacrifices, more moral codes. It is a person, a God who did not stay distant from human pain, but stepped directly into it and transformed it through love.